The Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark is a budget 3D printer that doesn't compromise on build quality. The machined aluminium beams and injection molded parts are a far cry from the usual quality that you find on some 3D printers. Retailing at around $400, there's also a number of upgrades available for it as well, which add some exciting new capabilities. So join me, James Bruce with MakeUseOf.com Reviews, as I take a closer look at the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark. So the machine arrives in a few separate parts, but it's certainly not what I would call a DIY kit. Construction is relatively simple and just involves bolting some parts together. It took less than an hour to put the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark together, and then I started testing the single color core package. And I am very pleased to report that it was reliable printing from the get-go, no errors, it just worked. Obviously, without the auto level mechanism, you will need to level it yourself manually, but this is a pretty simple process that just involves going back and forth between points until the piece of paper under the printhead has a little friction on it. It's not a difficult process. First, I printed the Lucky Cat test G-code that was supplied on an SD card, and that came out really well. Printing is really fast and really smooth. The only noise I could hear was from the fan. And the print quality out of the box is pretty stunning. So, full marks there. The only thing I really don't like about this design of printer is the use of the Bowden tube. Changing the filament on a Bowden tube when you have to move it 1 centimeter at a time, pressing a button each time, is just a royal pain in the butt. But other than that, I really like the basic core package. It does have a filament sensor which will alarm and pause the print if you ever run out of filament, so that's cool. So the first test print with the G-code supplied, that went really well, and I was quickly able to slice my own model and get that printed too. I have tested a ton of 3D printers over the years, and to get a print this good just out of the box without tweaking anything is really impressive. To slice your own models, you'll need to use the Lotmaxx slicer software, available for Windows only. Now, it appears to be a modified version of Cura, but don't quote me on that because I usually use Slicer. I'm sure at some point in the future it'll be supported by things like Octoprint for networked printing, but right now I just used the SD card for the test. So one thing I really wanted to draw your attention to with the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark is just how quiet it is. That was the one thing that struck me during the very first test print that I did. When my old Prusa Mark II is printing, the entire house can hear it. On the other hand, when this is printing, I mean, I would happily sleep next to this or have it in the office while I'm working. There is an idle noise with the fan that you can hear, but when it's actually printing, the axes, the motors themselves are whisper silent, and that's even going on full speed. So the core printer package, the single color printing, awesome. Let's move on and talk about the upgrades. The laser engraving module is the easiest of the upgrades to install. You just bolt it onto the side of the main printhead. And then once you've plugged it in, the printer will automatically recognize that it's in laser engraving mode and will only allow you to print laser engraving G-codes. Unfortunately, the results are just really disappointing. For some reason, it prints your design line by line like an old dot matrix printer, rather than in one smooth motion as it does when 3D printing, and I'm really not sure why it does that. I hope this is a software problem that can be upgraded in the future, because there are laser engravers out there at a cheaper price point which do print properly in one smooth motion and not line by line like this. Clearly the laser itself is powerful and capable of a lot better than this, but right now I just wouldn't bother with the engraving module. So next up, I swapped out the default single color printhead for the dual color, bi-color printing option, and this really opens up some cool creative possibilities. Unfortunately, this is where I also started to run into some initial problems because the interface is a little bit disjointed and the upgrade process itself is fairly complex. So first you need to update the firmware by changing the configuration file. So once you've done that, the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark interface changes slightly to represent the fact that there are now 2 extruders. Although in reality there's 2 motors driving an extruder when there's only one single printhead. So the temperature that's listed on the second extruder doesn't actually apply, and it'll be 0. And that's where I first started thinking, maybe I've broken something because the temperature won't rise. There's actually only one print head into which the 2 Bowden tubes will now push into. And there's a couple of things you should know about printing in this way that I wasn't aware of, because this isn't something I've tried before. So firstly, with this printer, you can't push both of the filaments into the print head at the same time. It just jams up and doesn't let you go in any further. Instead, one has to be pulled out and then the other one has to go in. Now, I wasn't aware of this. I thought you could sort of color mix them like you can on some printers, not so with this. So another consequence of dual color printing is that you need to sort of clean the nozzle each time you swap it over. And this means extruding a little bit before you go back and print. And if you're wondering, well, where does this waste stuff go? It actually goes off to the side in a column of wasted plastic. Now, you can sort of turn off this color cleaning process, but I don't suggest doing that. I did try, and I just ended up with really blobby prints and no color separation on the print at all. So if you are going to buy color print, you just have to accept that there's going to be a lot of wastage as it cleans the nozzle out. So for instance, with this G-code test that they provided for this cute little cone, and it is very nicely printed cone, I should say, it also produced a column of waste off to the side that weighs almost as much, if not more, than the cone itself. And on top of that, it then printed a small, very thin shell around the cone. I'm not entirely sure why, but I think it might be to do with keeping the temperature up. But my point is, that's an awful lot of waste to make for one admittedly nice little bicolor cone. So unless you were printing a plate of 10 of these at one time, I just don't think that this waste is worth the effort. Anyway, once I got it working, bicolor printing can be really impressive and really open up some creative possibilities, but it is a lot more difficult to work with. I also tried to print some large bicolor signs. However, at this point I started to notice it was pillowing a lot on the bottom layers and all throughout the print, in fact, dragging the print head through it. After some further experimentation, it appears this was only when using the 0.2 millimeter setting, the normal setting in the Lotmaxx software. At fine or finer levels of detail, this just didn't happen. So not quite sure what's going on there again, but it's a software setting. The hardware itself is capable of some incredible results. So what's my verdict then on the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark? Well, the core model, the single color printer, is incredible. Fantastic results right out of the box. And that's pretty rare when it comes to 3D printers. It's a good solid construction, though it does arrive semi-built, so you will need to spend half hour actually putting it together. But it's nowhere near the level of DIY 3D printer kits that I've seen. Right off the bat, I had some great quality prints just on the standard single color extruder, and the removable build plate is really useful. You just pull it off and then snap it, and the print comes right off. You don't have to scrape things off. Like most 3D printers, you'll probably need to tweak it a bit, and it depends on the filament and the quality of filament that you put into it. The detachable control panel is genuinely useful, and again, I was so shocked at how quiet it was. So overall, the build quality is great. The 23 centimeter squared by 28 centimeter build area is impressive, and the heated build tray is great. So as a beginner printer, the fact that you can get great prints on it right out of the box is definitely a bonus, and I would thoroughly recommend the core package. Although the software is custom, I could easily see myself using this as a daily printer. However, there are some complications and issues with the optional upgrades. The laser engraver, as I mentioned, is just really disappointing. It's not hard to fit by any means, it's really easy to use, but the results, the output, just aren't that impressive and really reduce its utility for me. Now, the auto leveling feature I haven't mentioned yet, and that's because, frankly, I had no end of troubles with it. I've not used this kind of auto leveler before. It's a BL Touch system, which is very low cost, but just didn't work for me. In fact, every time I tried to level with it, at one specific point, it would always plow the print head right down into the heated bed. Obviously not a good thing. It would seem that in order to auto level, you have to manually level first. It's just not comparable to the auto leveling technologies, for instance, used on Prusa printers, with the inductive probe, in which you can have a completely warped build plate and it'll adjust in software and do everything fine and it'll still print. With this, I just ended up unplugging the BL Touch auto leveler and doing it manually, which was a lot quicker and a lot easier. Now, it's not an expensive upgrade to add in this BL Touch, so if you wanted to try it, then go ahead. But for me, it doesn't offer any benefit, so I couldn't really see the point. So one thing that was really exacerbated for me when trying to use the auto leveler is that there's no live Z adjustment. So if I did want to make it closer to the nozzle or back it off a bit, then I had to do that again manually by hand anyway, using the dials under the bed, at which point I just really can't see the point of having an auto leveler. The bicolor printing upgrade takes a lot more effort to change over. As well as completely disassembling the print head and then reassembling it, you also have to install a new driver underneath the printer, which drives the second extruder, which you also need to fit. It's a little bit more complicated. Finally, it adds complications on the software side of things, because in order to print in two colors, you actually need two models or one model split in two. Now, this is easy enough for things like signs where you can manually, slice it in half. But for other dual color models, there just aren't that many available, and creating them is a whole other level of complication that as a beginner you probably won't want. Add that to the fact that there's a massive column of wastage for everything you now print in two colors. I just don't think it's worth it. The other issue with these upgrades is the cabling. Once you start to add any of them on, the cabling gets a lot messier. Out of the box, the cabling is really neat inside of this braided cable, which goes down to the side of the printer. It just looks beautiful and professional. With the upgrades, they're not a part of the braided cable wrap, of course, and they plug in around the front of the machine, so you end up with cables dangling everywhere. So yes, while bicolor printing is a very cool feature to have that adds some creative possibilities, I think particularly if you're new to 3D printing, if you do really want to use a bicolor printer, then perhaps look at a model that has that built into the design from the start. It's designed that way rather than as an optional upgrade. Or even better, just don't bother with bicolor printing at all, because despite the cool results, the extra wastage that you get and the added complications probably aren't worth the effort. Don't forget that you can actually print things like two-color signs by simply sending a message to the printer halfway through to change the filament. You don't need two extruders to be able to do that. So overall, I think the Lotmaxx SC-10 Shark is a really well-built entry-level printer. Stunning print quality for the price and reliable out of the box in my experience. But in my opinion, you should probably skip the optional upgrades, because I don't think they add that much to the experience and certainly aren't worth the effort. Anyway, thanks to Lotmaxx for sending the SC-10 Shark out for review and for offering us another one in a giveaway. To be in with a chance of winning, just click on the link in the description over at the full review article at makeuseof.com. At the end of that article, you'll find a giveaway widget. Pop your details in there and you'll be in with a chance of winning. Use the video code SHARK for some bonus entries in the competition. Entries close in about a month, and be sure to add competitions at makeuseof.com to your address book so you don't miss the email from me telling you that you've won the competition. Good luck. Please hit like if you enjoyed this video, and consider subscribing for more weekly gadget giveaways, tech tutorials, hardware reviews, and more from all of us over at makeuseof.com. Until next time.